This is Miki, this is Apple, and this is Richard.
Our original goal in mind for our social utility was to create content of physical and online stores for our followers so they could discover new stores and find inspiration for vintage fashion, thus facilitating the circulation of vintage lover community.
We built on that foundation and created posts to not only create and share content using other stores as inspirations, but also to introduce vintage fashion to people who may want to get into it by posting fun facts in our stories.
We use multi-software for our creation. For example, using Canva for the graphic design, some of the video software for editing the outcome of the interview, like using the Adobe Premiere Pro, using the Google Docs for the content organization, and the Google Keep for the project management.
We all try to look for stores and we approach them on Instagram or WhatsApp, inviting them to have an interview with us. We will come up with questions related to the store if they agree to do the interview, and then we will interview them through Instagram or go to the physical store, and then we will edit a video if it's a physical store. If it is an online store, we will just make a post that we ask them for a couple of pictures, and then we will conclude the interview, and then we will also do some graphic design on the content. For the in-depth interviews, we want to introduce physical vintage stores and let the owners tell the stories, which will be presented in a video form with English and Chinese subtitles to cater different audience, for people who understand Cantonese and also for people who doesn't. The reason why we want to do it in a video form is to really showcase what the store can offer and the whole ambience, and also that intimate feel of the owner actually speaking to the users. We want to create an archive of Hong Kong vintage stores, and we'll have a smaller interview with a text presented on Instagram to conduct the store information, and we want to use this to help users to get reference and information regarding vintage stores, such as hot items or why did they start the business with both online and physical store. And we want to create an information loop, and we want to feed our users with information. People can search for Hong Kong vintage stores using our hashtag called archive anytime, so we're creating an information loop and we're giving back to the users.
We posted terms relating to vintage fashion, like explaining the meaning of what vintage is, as well as vintage facts to help people be more knowledgeable about vintage fashion. This is a form of integration of new followers into this community. Vintage is denoting something from the past of high quality, especially something representing the best of its kind. And vintage clothes that are produced for over 100 years is called vintage clothing, while antique clothing is a collectible item of at least 100 years old of age, and it is an object that represents a previous era or time period in human society. While vintage clothing is a more generic term for garments originating from a previous era. These facts are the introduction to new followers to get introduced to vintage fashion, and using this example we can see that these facts help new people learn more about vintage and allow them to join the vintage community.
For outfit of the day, we share vintage outfits by using the story function of the Instagram, helping followers get the concept on how to dress in vintage style. With the ranking system, we create a feedback loop to have the interaction with followers. We share the posts that related to vintage outfits on the story with the simple wordings describe the photos, and the followers can have a track by clicking it and having the ranking system on the story. Therefore, the feedback loop is done and the followers can having the interactive with us.
We had a few comments on our post that showed us that our followers were learning something from our content, which was a fulfilling experience. And it also showed us that people were engaging with our digital artifact and thus being a part of our vintage community.
We are happy to have a chance to create our Instagram account, engaging into the items that we are all interested in, and sharing them to the public. We faced difficulty while we are starting the account as a new experience for us. Luckily, we share the same goals and be confident that we can overcome our problems together.
I'm glad to have helpful groupmates that work really well together. We divide and conquer, maximizing our abilities. Even when we encounter obstacles, we can easily solve them as a team. Through the interviewing experience, I learned much more about vintage clothing and the history behind it. Hopefully, we can promote vintage culture with our digital artifacts and interact with more vintage lovers in Hong Kong.